Let me very shortly introduce everybody. Florian Skrabal is the founder and boss of DOSSIER, which is an independent investigative journalism platform in Austria that was founded in 2012. And is one of the examples on how to do investigative journalism with a new startup. Well, actually, now it has started, and it is quite well renowned and has a very good reputation in Austria. Andy Kaltenbrunner is the managing director of Medienhaus Wien, which is an institution for research, for media research, and he was a journalist, for example, for the Austrian weekly newspaper Profil, and since the year 2000 he is into research. He's currently leading a research project with the Austrian Academy of Sciences on innovation journalism in the German-speaking countries. And Andy has conducted a study on government advertising and government funding for the media in Austria recently, which has led to quite a bit of discussion in the scene. Welcome, Andy. Anita Zielina is the founder and the director of the News, Innovation and Leadership section at the great Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. But she also has a biography in journalism and media management. Prior to moving to New York, she was the head of the chief product officer at the NZZ, Neue Zürcher Zeitung in Zürich, and before that she was deputy editor at Stern in Hamburg and at Der Standard in Vienna. Welcome, Anita, and we're glad that you are in Vienna and can join us in person. Gerold Riedmann is editor-in-chief at Vorarlberger Nachrichten. Vorarlberg is the most western province of Austria, next to Switzerland, and managing director of Russmedia, the publishing house, and he is leading digital transformation at Russmedia. He's also European president of the International News Media Association. And Mark, sorry for introducing you last, but it was kind of going in around. Hello, I see you on the screen here. Mark Dekan is CEO of Ringier Axel Springer Media and is responsible for the CEE joint venture of Axel Springer and Ringier, the largest digital enterprise in CEE with 165, I hope this is the correct number, titles in Poland, Hungary, Serbia, Slovakia, Estland, Lettland, and Lithuania. And he is also the CEO of in Poland and is there responsible directly for the operations of the group. Hello, Mark.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello. So, well, actually, I think many of us want to talk about journalism, but it's very clear that if we want to talk about journalism, we have to talk about money, even if we wouldn't like to. So that's what we are going to do today, and I'm going to start with Anita, because Anita is from Austria and has very deep insights. She's also a member of the board of the public broadcaster, but she has the view from outside, from New York, which always sounds very good, and this is a very different view on the situation here in Austria and in Central Europe. Where do you see chances for innovative ways of financing journalism, and we are talking about good and quality journalism, that might not have been taken so far here in Austria and, let's say, in Central Europe?
Thank you, Daniela. So let me maybe start by saying that the easy answer is not, oh, there is a secret hidden recipe to make money in journalism that we just haven't tried, and if we all just focus 100% on that, everything's going to be fine. Because I do feel that sometimes, you know, the tendency of our industry, not just in Europe, but also in the United States, to find something and then think this is going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve all our issues. And at some point that silver bullet was video reach-based advertising. At some point that silver bullet kind of became subscriptions. And I think if we learned one thing, then the single silver bullet that solves everyone's problems and makes all of us independent just simply doesn't exist. So what I do see in the United States particularly is that this realization has kicked in a bit more than it might have kicked in already in other parts of the world. And that the importance of a diversified revenue portfolio, the importance of combining several stable business models that are aligned with the strategy of an organization that maximize independence and maximize basically independence from whatever contractions, whatever disruptions, whatever problems might happen to one part of your business model, that this is really, if there is a silver bullet, then that there is no silver bullet, that it's a combination. Because if you, building on what Alexander Rabit said before, if you just have one revenue source, that makes it very easy for the person or the organization or whoever is behind that revenue source to try to influence your journalism. So now with the combination, what we're seeing in the United States is that a lot of media organizations have a combination of user-funded models, membership models are growing extensively, subscription models of whatever kind, reach-based models that often still include advertising, and then some kind of subsidy, some kind of state funding, some kind of philanthropic support. And the ones who have that diversified to a certain extent tend to fare better than the ones who just kind of put all the eggs in one basket.
Okay. Gerold, I want to hand over at this point. What do you think is the most important part of a diversified portfolio, or can you tell us a success story from your media house?
Yeah, no, I won't for the beginning, but the most dangerous thing in Austria, I guess, is that most media companies are at this point very dependent from their print revenues, and that is a cliff that is going to come, no matter what we do in Austria. And the longer you sit back and relax and try to maximize this model, and this happens actually in Vienna at this very point with 3 free sheets on the market. Think back at the towns, at the cities where you came from 2 days earlier. Are there free sheet papers? No. It's a model that has had no success internationally, that is not existing in most cities, but in Vienna, there are mostly 3 free sheet papers. That's relying on an old business model. That's like living in a museum, and that makes you very, very, it puts you in a dangerous position and in a dependent position, because that money has to come from somewhere, and in Austria it happens to be the government. We are building on a very strong diverse revenue source that is, as Anita has put it, reader revenue, which becomes the most important source of financing. It used to be ads. Ads are going back in the Austrian market, in Europe generally. There are some other parts in the world where ads never had this role for financing journalism, but I think journalism as we mean it can't be financed solely through ads. And it cannot be done digitally. With the reach model, you come to a certain point, but we try to be a platform on which things happen. So if you're strong in one province, for us, we try to be the platform of our state, of our province, that's Vorarlberg. We try to be the platform on which things happen. And that gives you several revenue opportunities. Reader revenue, which is the one that we are striving for most in the latest time, because it's a very, I think, good source of money that makes you very independent. Of course, it's the ad reach-based model, but on a platform, you're only a good platform if you have some audience there. So it's, of course, the goal to have eyeballs, like in the good old times. And if you have people that you can connect to other people, then there are revenue models, be it events, be it reader revenue, be it ads.
Florian, the audience, I think you have a very loyal audience, don't you? So you could be a rich man.
No, I don't think so. It took us like 9 years since we started with DOSSIER, this investigative non-profit newsroom, to finally come to the point where it's the first year since we started that we have 1 year financed ahead. Like, so we know we have enough money for until April 2022. So what I've been seeing is that the audience is constantly growing. We have 6,000 members now, paying roughly 60 euros per person, and that 80% of that goes to our payrolls, or to my payroll. Every journalist at DOSSIER, we have 6 employees, is earning the same amount, so it's a very democratic system. I get the same I get the same payment as my colleagues, although I'm the boss. Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to be a rich man, but I hope I'm going to be a happy man doing what I like most, journalism.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the latest crowdfunding campaign and what it means for the necessity to have a loyal audience and this very strong connection to your audience?
Yeah, so as we started DOSSIER as something new, there was one basic principle: we will not accept any advertisement. A lot of people are thinking this to be a mistake. However, we started our investigative reporting on the situation, the problem with government advertising in Austria, which is a real systematic problem in Austria. And it's not that there's too little public money going into the media market, it's just going to the wrong media players. So what we started is to think to actually build a business model, and our biggest problem was that we are all journalists and not media managers, so we didn't have a business plan and we just had our journalistic approach. So far we've tried a lot of different things, and we started off being online only and online first. We're still online, we're still in the internet and on other mobile devices, but we gave our content away for free. It was not until we started introducing a soft paywall that people are actually would become members with DOSSIER. So in the first years we had a voluntary model of donations, and only that we started actually introducing a paywall, and only after that we started introducing a printed magazine, we saw our member base rise, and that we have been trying to build ever since. And this year, DOSSIER was actually on the cliff of closing down because we had a big slap suit from the biggest oil and gas company in Austria, OMV. And we lost the contract. We were also working as contractors for the ORF, and we lost this contract. And so we started crowdfunding and saying, help DOSSIER now, become a member, and that was successful. But it was, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's full stop.
So, okay, you mentioned public funding and public money, and it was mentioned before today many times. And I think this is an issue where we can discuss quite a lot in Austria, because, well, it sounds pretty fine to get public money, but there are some flaws in the system. Andy, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Daniela. Well, first of all, Florian gives us hope, because when we will come back to the point that there's some kind of crowdfunding, that there's some point of funding by the audiences and closer relations, and there's only a few examples so far in Austria for that. That's another critical point. There's other countries, like I'm working a lot in Spain teaching Gerold, so where we see dozens and hundreds of digital operations. Meanwhile, not all of them successful, but it's different. So that's the privilege of a stable country, theoretically, like Austria, that people still print-minded, with a readership that can be only compared to the readership in Japan. I always read in the digital news report. But as we can see, under threat in many categories, especially print, as Gerold mentioned. Of course, you have to have quite a diversity in funding, but in Austria, one speciality, traditional speciality, that has come to a very high peak now during the last years especially, is public funding. Public funding is in different ways. It's sometimes a transparent, legally, clearly ruled funding by press subsidies according to traditional rules, sometimes very old-fashioned rules, not very useful for a digital transition, but clear rules. The other thing is ads. That's the public money given for newspapers, magazines, and others by the government, by local governments, by public bodies. To give you a figure, in Austria last year, we have the so-called Transparenzdatenbank. I used the German word, which is a database giving the idea that everybody has to fill in the data of how much public money is used for advertising of the public bodies. And last year, that's been 222 million euros, which is quite some money. Given for that reason, and there's some hidden amount also, which actually we in our studies come to about 300 million euros. And by the government itself, the government of the Republic of Austria, we had a record of 33 million given to newspapers and their digital operation, which is quite some money for 14 newspapers. So the question arises, and that's part of our study. Everybody can read it. Sorry, it's in this one is in German. It's online for free on the Medienhaus Wien website. But the outcome, I mean, the clear point is that it's not given due to clear regulation. It's very often given. I mean, well, we don't know. For whatever reason, one minister might do some advertising campaign in one newspaper and the others not. Then the federal chancellor, that was one of the points the last 1 or 2 years, said, well, we have a formula, we have a rule. When you look closer into that rule, into that formula that's not fully published, you find out that certain market competitors, are privileged to others, especially the free papers. That's key part of the rules, which is an interesting point. If we talk so much about audiences are the ones who have to pay the bill at the end of the day because to build up close relations with good journalism, why is there a special funding in some way by advertisement for those who do not need the audiences, but need the ads and become more or less dependent on that kind of ads. And that's the discussion we've heard here in many ways. So, but to make it clear also, and maybe as the final point for the entrance, like Stephen Engelberg said today in the US, people would say, stay away from state money as good as you can. We never would accept it. No, that's not the approach we have in Central Europe. We have a different media culture. Our approach, as researchers also, is to say, yes, we need some kind of state money. The truth is that what happened in Central Europe, countries like Austria over decades after the Second World War, the state had some relevant importance with his media regulation, which can also be counted in money. But it has to be transparent, it has to be clear, it has been democratically discussed, and it can be changed according to the needs to support independent journalism, and, well, stressing the point, independent is not necessary in this whole, I think. So that was the first approach of our work we did during the last years, counting a lot of things and trying to analyze what does it mean for the future of Austrian journalism. So that was not the optimistic part. I come back to the optimistic part.
There's a lot of money, maybe.
Well, there's not money, but not very often not used the way we are discussing it here.
Well, so as you can see, it's not pretty clear. In Austria, we have a discussion if we are tending more to the western part of Europe or if it goes into direction of the eastern part in terms of democracy, but also in terms of the media system, of course. And so now it's the time, Mark, to hand over to you, because you have lots of experience with the business in South and Eastern European countries, and I'd be very interested in, well, how does it work to do journalism in this country, first, and second, what is the responsibility of a Western media company to foster independent journalism in countries that might, where the situation gets worse?
I mean, first of all, I would say that Central Eastern Europe, in terms of journalism, independence of journalism, is a very tough neighborhood. And we can clearly say that the environment has considerably worsened over the last decade. So when we started, for instance, Ringier, Axel, Springer in 2010, we had very stable emerging democratic structures in most of those countries. And I think that the deterioration of the business model of media has also contributed to the deterioration of democratic standards. And I don't need to cite the example of Hungary, which you for sure know, looking at it from Vienna very, very well. The situation in Poland is also not much better in the meantime. We have seen yesterday the resolution of the European Parliament, where they have basically condemned the situation of the free media and the rule of law in Hungary and Poland in particular. And speaking about the responsibility of Western publishers, we can also see that when after the fall of the Iron Curtain, it were Austrian, it were German, French publishers foremost, who were the first to invest and build very good portfolios there, and also helped in establishing a journalistic independent culture. And with the problems that arose of digitization, many of these publishers have withdrawn. So if you look at the landscape of foreign publishing houses, which are still invested today, compared to who were invested 10 years ago, you would be shocked. There's very few foreign publishers left who are invested and are committed to the region. And this has led also to the sale of a couple of very influential titles to owners who do not pursue media as a business. They would like to gain influence. They would like to have power. They rather see the expenses in the media as a marketing expense, either to support their businesses or to gain direct influence into politics. I mean, let's face it. Also, we see that in the immediate neighborhood. Yeah, we know that the Keshma, which is a foundation of several media titles in Hungary, has been contributed for free by oligarchs, and previously they have been collected from other private owners. We see in Czech Republic a prime minister who is also one of the biggest publishers. We know about the situation in Slovakia, where oligarchs like Penta, big investment groups, have taken stakes in media. And in Poland, we see what happens to public media when it becomes entirely partisan and a weapon. And this, of course, is a very worrying trend. And I think the only way to go against it is to make media a business again, with an interest for private investors to run it as a business. But the environment has become very, very hostile, and I'm afraid that a lot of standards have already been lost, and it's a big battle where we need also, particularly in Central Eastern Europe, a strong European Union to work against it. But so far, this hope has not fulfilled. Let's put it that way.
I want to, from this perspective, go back to our still, we are in another stage of the development of the media system. I want to go back to Austria for a moment. And I mean, what can we do now in order to keep the business model that strong that we don't, that we won't have a development as, for example, in Hungary or in Poland? Just asking in a round, Mark, who has any ideas? Yeah.
I mean, support some. Key points have been already mentioned. Support a diverse market, which means when it comes to the point of what's state funding doing, what we started with, of course, there could be some funding for entrepreneurial journalism, for entrepreneurial journalism. There is not so much of that. That's one thing. The other thing is finding regulations that give the market a chance. I mean, in all the production processes, I think some of the publishers, Gerold and also the experts, Anita, will know what that means. And the other thing is that we focus one simple thing on talking about journalism funding and journalism innovation. That's one point we very much stressed, that for a very long time it was about media innovation, and that was tech support, or it was about all kind of innovation, but not journalism was in the focus. And so what we're doing now very much in research, and I happily can see that also the European Union has changed its wording a bit in the last 1 or 2 years when it comes to journalist innovation, because the special point is that we have to have it clear that we have to have a count on what does it mean for the journalistic working situation in a country. And to give you finally just one number for Austria, what we are talking about, as we're talking about Austria, one of our studies is some now and then, which is complicated to count the journalists in the country, and finding socio-demographic data. And our last count just ended before Corona. We counted some 5,300 journalists in Austria, which is quite the number, but it was 25% less than 15 years ago. So we lost a quarter of the journalists, and that's a loss of quality of debate, and a loss of quality of interaction and of investigation, etc., etc. So the focus, I mean, that's not already the perfect plan, but the focus has to lie on journalism and the way it can be done in a country, and not so much on technology, which is important, definitely, or on structures only, on political structures. So we have to change the tone of the debate also in many countries.
10 years ago, when I switched from journalism to digital media management, and 5 years ago back to journalism and keeping the media management, I kept saying I went to the dark side of business. Today, I wouldn't consider it as the dark side of business. It's the foundation on which journalism in the private sector is built. And if we research companies, or if we look at other companies, maybe to write about them or to acquire them, or for whatsoever reason, we look at their P&Ls and we try to find out how they're flying, what are their incomes. And if you look at Austrian media companies, my first, and for healthy journalism, my first look would be to the P&L and look how much % of revenue comes from public funded sources. It can be up to 40% in Austria. Is that healthy? Okay, how much is coming from public sources, how much is coming from Google or Facebook in future maybe, how much is coming from things that you can't rely on. And if it's more than your EBITDA, then the more than you make money, you're in a dangerous position because you can't afford, or you're living over your expenses, so to speak. And my first approach would be, or is, to create so many revenue streams with a brand, and we see examples in Germany that are very, very successful with their journalism, like Die Zeit, very trusted news brands. Yes, they're having a wine shop. Yes, they're doing event business. Yes, they have diversified their brands to events and to other places where they never thought they would be. They have a growing print audience. They have a growing digital audience. And I think there are some North Stars in the private media sector that we see. And it's very well connected to the business, although it's prime journalism. So those two things have nothing against each other. They have to come in pairs.
I would probably, and that builds on all of what has already been said on the panel here, I would probably cluster it in 3 areas: transformation, collaboration, and media entrepreneurship. And the first area is pretty much what Gerold talked about right now. It pains me tremendously when I have conversations with Austrian or German publishers, and they're like, oh, we had a fantastic year, we had some special government COVID subsidies, advertising is kind of coming back, you know, page impressions were great, now we can stop that whole transformation thing. I literally have these conversations in the year 2021, and it pains me tremendously because I'm like, I live in a country where 25% of local newspapers have died in the last 10 years. And I right now can feel, living in the United States, what it does to a country when that happens. And when you have like whole regions of the country that have no independent journalism, not one investigative journalist trying to cover what's wrong in politics and corruption and so forth. So I think and I've been saying that like a broken record. I feel very old when I do that, because I feel I've been saying it together with Gerold and many here on the panel for many years. But my one wish is to not rely on what's still there, and to be aggressive in trying to transform your own business model as a legacy media organization. The second thing that I'd say, and that is something that is interesting to see in the United States right now, that there is a trend towards collaboration. And collaboration is between publishers and between media organizations. And collaboration is interesting because we all, for years, we've all been talking about, well, that would be really important, but we've been very bad at it as media organizations. For various reasons, different interests to kind of compete for eyeballs or money and so forth. So what's interesting now, and that builds on your focus on technology, Anita, that you just said, the collaboration happens in a different way. There are tech stacks being built that are very cheap, very affordable, very raw, that publishers, especially small and local and independent publishers, can get for very little money. The Tiny News Collective is such a movement. Newspack by WordPress is such a movement. There are German platforms like Steady and so forth that are moving into the same direction, where it's like, hey, you don't have to become a whole publishing house. Pay $199 a month and focus on your journalism. You don't have to build everything from scratch, because what we are seeing now is a lot of organizations try to rebuild or build the whole tech stack and data stack and marketing stack from scratch, which is incredibly expensive and exhausting and needs a lot of resources that you then can't focus on your journalism. And then the last thing that I'll say is media entrepreneurship. And while it is, of course, saddening to see how many newspapers have died in the United States, and especially local newspapers have died, what is encouraging is to see how many new publishers have sprung up, most of them purely digital, nearly all of them purely digital, many of them with events businesses or community businesses somehow attached to them, in regions that did not have journalism anymore. And that is possible because, one, there is a certain appreciation and fostering of an entrepreneurial mindset, but also because there are players in the ecosystem, some of them philanthropic players, but some of them city players. New York City has, for example, a very strong kind of entrepreneurial support ecosystem that make it possible to start something and get some kind of starting capital. And that is something that I think there are tiny, tiny movements of that in Austria, but I think it could be way more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to address an issue that came up in the talks we had before this panel with Mark and with Florian, and actually with all of you, but we haven't talked so much about it. In the panels before on that day, we were talking a lot about how politicians are undermining the trust in journalism and the relation between journalists and their audiences. So, well, my question is, how is that connected to business, audience and business and trust? How can we rebuild that? And is that possible? Is it possible to gain the trust back and to bring the audience back to pay? Mark, can you tell us a little bit?
Well, I mean, this is a fundamental problem. I think globally we have seen Donald Trump calling the New York Times the fake news media and so forth, but it's also very close in our own countries for sure. I mean, we have seen a journalist being murdered in Slovakia. It has been our journalist who has been previously to that, at the end of the day, defamated by the members of the government and ridiculed. And we see that hate speech is used on social media by party members against journalists being critical. Public media is used to really intimidate journalists and media outlets. This is a very common practice in many of the countries we are operating in. And this is a hostile environment, which is, of course, undermining, at the end of the day, the trust in the media, and the society gets very polarized. We also see, if you look to Poland, you have a totally split, divided society. You have on the one hand side the peace government electorate, on the other hand side the opposition, and each of them have their own media. So whatever you put on the other side, it's even not reaching the other side, because they, even if they would read it or hear about it, they wouldn't believe it. And I think this is, it's a believers media which is emerging here. And I think this is very problematic for a society per se. What's the solution? I mean, the solution can only be if you have democratic players who also acknowledge the role of media in a democratic society, and not to understand media as the tool to embark on power and stay there. So media is for the people and not for those in power. But this is a thinking which, of course, is also in the process of development still, particularly in the former communist countries. Yeah. So this is something which gradually emerges, and I think with the young generation, this has this understanding is on a very different level, and it is probably with the elder ones. And we see this bounce back now as a kind of setback for the democratization of these countries, and it's definitely a longer process. That's for sure. Okay. But in general, I think we need more commitment to democratic standards there. We need also some kind of regulatory moves in order to change this hostile environment which is being created at the moment.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Mark said. I think there's still a responsibility with the journalists or the media corporations themselves to actually open the doors to show how journalism is working, to be transparent with their own funding. For example, in Austria, I was working for a quality newspaper in Austria. I would never be able to find out what my boss is, how much my boss is making money, where the money is coming from. If I cannot do that as a journalist, how could I expect my readers to know where's the revenue coming from, where's the money going to, and what is the mission of so many media corporations, media houses? Is the mission to have, like it was said, that the free newspapers? I can't see real journalistic work in there because it's so often copy-paste. The work is done with press agencies in Austria, in Germany. What is the real new thing that the media houses are offering to the audience? What is the journalism? And this I'm missing, and I think there is more responsibility with the media corporations to reveal their missions, to make their operations more, or their journalism more transparent, to establish a better culture of admitting to mistakes. And I see up and downs also with, we are a non-profit newsroom because we want to take the profit thinking out of this journalistic greater good. So I also see problems with some ownership structure or with some decisions that are taking with laying off journalists or not employing young journalists, while old journalists are making a lot of money and they're protected by the systems. So I think there is a lot to be looked into the media houses and themselves as well.
And things progress slowly, and we might not. I mean, I'm undecided there as well. I just had a high school reunion, and it's not a friend of mine. It was a co-student of mine, but I know him very well. He knows me. We spent years together. And he asked me, oh, if I meet you as an editor-in-chief, how free are you to write on a scale from 1 to 100 tomorrow in the newspaper? And I asked him back, what do you expect me to write? I was wondering if he wanted me to write about reptile humans or I don't know what. No, he just wanted, working at an oil company, he wanted to know how free are you to publish what you want. And it made me thinking, why would a close ally of mine think that I'm not free to write what I want to write? Because I'm convinced, and I'm still convinced, that I can write and will write whatever I think is right, and it has to be right to be written. It has to be fact-checked and all the other things. And of course, we do failures all the time, but I feel free to, in Austria, and if we heard Maria Ressa before and others, I don't want to compare the situation in Austria to places like the Philippines or like Hungary, but on the other hand, you get those calls. why have you written what you've written. Also today, there was an editorial of my colleague Hubert Patra of Kleine Zeitung again, who makes it as a, what should I say, as a cleansing mechanism, very public, what he gets in his inbox. And he writes whom of the government has called him and whom has written what, and that makes it, even if you heard Alexander Vrabets speaking of the shift in the ORF, the thing that you want to have as Chancellor of Austria at this point is, in my opinion, loyalty. And loyalty is something journalism can't give you, won't give you anywhen. So if you're expecting loyalty, questions like, why don't you like me arise? Well, because media doesn't have to like you, but we have to make progress as a community. And that raises some question together with the financing and the power of financing, and to put those figures together. The official media funding is 10 million or less than 10 million. The unofficial ad media financing is 200 million or 230, 300 million. The state-owned media, or it's not state-owned, it's the public broadcaster, sorry, I want to be specific. Public broadcaster gets 630 million in radio license fees. So this is the dominant player where people have trust. People have trust in their newspapers as well, but there are players on the market that completely rely on the government, and in some cases, you can sense it while reading the stories.
So, yeah.
Maybe pick up just 2 or 3 points, bring it together. One is the question of trust, how to develop more trust, and as mentioned before, transparency is a very important point in many of from many of the panelists. But the transparency actually still does not exist for a great majority of users, of audiences. Just think about media journalism we do have in Austria. There's a few very brave, very good colleagues writing or publishing about media questions, but there's still a lot to do to explain for journalism what it does in the country, openly, with self-criticism, with all the discussions needed, and that does not exist. I mean, respecting all the colleagues who do a good job. If we think for the on the public broadcaster, there's one format once a month in radio that's a reflection on media situations. So that's what the public broadcaster, and Alex Vrabets isn't here anymore, is doing actually, and that was a step forward he did a few years ago because it's been the first program of that kind. So if you want trust, then establish transparency, establish connection, establish interaction. We're living in the network society, so people will discuss it in other places if they don't discuss it with the professionals. As simple as that, and that's what happens.
Since it turns out that in Austria there's too much money.
Well, too much money it isn't, and that was the second point.
I didn't expect that.
Yeah, no, if you allow me, I mean, like Gerold said, I mean, that's another point. There was no transparency about that kind of funding. We did a quite simple study, counting for weeks money and where does it go to, and analyzing the revenue streams from public money. But that's an important thing. That's something research has also to do. That's, well, if it's funded, it's not funded. We paid it by our own. For some reason, there was no public interest in analyzing public funding for media. And some media houses supported, also Gerold's one, then finally that process. But that's another important thing, that people know that where's the money coming from. And when you said that when so much public money is on the stake for different companies to survive, then people for sure will ask questions. And if they are not answered, then there will be quite some doubts about the quality, and the trust will shrink.
And maybe just to add one last thought to what you just said, and obviously it would be, we won't say here there is too much money in the market, but actually, even compared to other countries, there is. It's just not distributed in a fair and transparent and logical and innovation-supportive way. And what happens if you distribute money and you incentivize behavior that actually prohibits innovation? And especially if you do that in a market that's already somehow strained for cash, to a certain extent you incentivize people to not to transform.
Sorry, that's the level of desperation not being high enough.
Yeah.
But on the other hand
listen,
side, it lures you to lean back. Yeah. On the other side, it gives the opportunity to other players in the market to try out new things and to conquer new spaces that we never thought we could get, like Florian is showing. We are trying something in our markets as well with TV. We never thought we could catch up to public broadcasting figures within a year, but it's possible. So the tech stack is there. WordPress is a great tool. Don't think too much about subscription logics and other things. It's out there. It's affordable. But are you willing to invest there or to do that? Yeah.
So interestingly, as the host country of the IPI Congress this year, our message is public funding is not the silver bullet. And if you want a case study for that, you can take Austria as a case study. If you allow me, and if we have time, I would just give the audience the chance to ask a question. Please move forward to please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Thank you. I'm Caroline Villemin with Fondation Hirondelle. I'm wondering if anyone on the panel is willing to take part to the Journalism Trust Initiative that is currently launched, which is a movement of more than 150 news organizations and news houses to be transparent about their ownership and financing and editorial policies. It's a platform you go and assess yourselves. And based on that assessment, then you can go to a step further to get a standardization of your media, kind of an ISO that would be worldwide recognized. Are there any Australian media in that process?
Actually, I don't know if there's Austrian media in the process. You know that, Gerold?
I'm familiar with the Trust project, but that's something completely different. I guess that was sending trust signals to search engines and other parts to show if it's if it could be trusted journalism. You reach some part that some companies are private, some companies are public, or are there any? Yeah, ORF is public.
Mark, can you?
Well, I hear of this initiative for the first time, but I'm very happy to hear it because it was exactly the idea our company has presented to the European Union, to the Commission 3 years ago. Yeah? So I'm really happy to hear that because I think this is highly needed. We need transparency, and I think this ISO certification is also a great idea because this can also be a lever or equality for advertisers, that they can say, hey, we support independent media who are really running media as a business. And I think if this is being used also in education to support media literacy among the audience, this can be very powerful. And I would definitely like to learn more about that.
Yes, I've not heard about it, but would also like to hear more. And I'm very transparent. I can tell you my monthly salary, which is quite unusual for Austrians to say. So I'm earning 1,900 after taxes.
Okay, I think it's time to move to the next question.
Hi, I come from the Middle East. I know you're talking a lot about Europe, but the rest of the world has many more problems. But one of the things that you talked about is coming interesting in our country because the private media, which is in bed with government, has suffered a lot because of the big tech giants. And now the government is thinking of setting up a fund to support independent media. So any advice you have that can somehow put some restraints on the government using this fund to further its own purposes? And another question, there's a lot of talk about constructive media and solutions media, solutions journalism, constructive journalism. Is that something that is discussed here in Europe, this type of media where you actually try to come up with solutions and not just, you know, raising anger in people?
Mm-hmm. Great question for the funding point. I mean, there's a discussion we do have in Central Europe in many countries, like foundations that are interested in doing so, but also governments that are changing their strategies and are thinking about funding. Let me give you one simple example. As in the Wiener Rathaus, and disclaimer, I was involved in that funding program that's called Wiener Medieninitiative. That's a small one, for a local one. Well, small one, 2 million, a bit more than 2 million a year, given to journalism. If people present their projects, entrepreneurial from companies, the key point here in Vienna was also for the politicians, and they were, they asked independent researchers, and our first thing was, besides all the categories, what might be funded, and the journalism is in the center, et cetera, what innovation might mean, and all the theoretical stuff, it was that really independent international juries are needed, and politics has got nothing to do from the moment it has decided that some money is annually given to that project. And I think yours a little bit was also funded by that. I'm happy for that, but by an independent international jury. So one point is, who is responsible for giving the money? Is it the minister? Is it the cabinet? Is it the prime minister? Or is it experts that are clearly selected? It's a simple process like in any others. So that's for the point of public funding. If needed, then have a close look into the structure and how it is ruled and how the system is ruled.
Yes, and I would like to add one thought. Yes, also Dossier received 100,000 euros from the city of Vienna, which surprised me a lot because we are very strong critics of the city of Vienna, so the government or the politicians didn't really have a say in it. But from a perspective of a small newsroom, I see the danger in government funding that if it gets a too big share in the newsroom's revenue stream, the dependency rises. And then if this money is not given, or if this money flow stops, you have this problem. So it always has to be in a certain relation to other revenue streams, and this comes back to the diversifying, because if you're not free to say, I'm not dependent on this money, and then you're not free in journalism, or not independent. Yeah.
And to Constructive, I mean, it starts with the commitment to free speech, right? And especially if you're talking about the Middle East, I can remember asking Saudi Arabians that I met in a university program at some night time to tell me their thoughts about the Khashoggi murder. It didn't turn out to be a good issue to discuss with them. So I think if it's considered to be a playground from the government to have some independent media making their stories there, you have to know that it might hurt. It might not be fun to play with a little bit of money, but it has to have a commitment for free speech in the beginning. I think it's useless in other ways. But to constructive journalism, I compare journalism a lot to the good old picture of a member sitting at the family breakfast table and telling stories. If it's bad stories every morning, I don't want to hear them any longer. I would send that guy away at some point. So it has to be a mixture of good stories and bad stories. When the Corona crisis hit, we made sure to not index our newspaper pages in Google for 2 weeks. Why did we do so? Because we printed cell phone numbers of real people that were willing to help in that very moment. And we didn't want to have those cell phone numbers in the internet for more than 2 weeks. Being a community media, being helpful, making initiatives is very close to campaign journalism. That's why it's very different. It's discussed from different sides in Europe, I should say. But there are signs of constructive journalism. We have our initiative up to today. Vorarlberg sticks together, not in a way that we don't want to see anyone else, although the rest of Austria thinks we do, but because we want to bring people closer together. That's our mission in the newsroom as well. We want to bring people closer together. Not always a good thing during a pandemic, but we will keep bringing people closer together.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to add to that? I want to bring you in because this is the last round because we're running out of time. You want
maybe on the public funding in general. I mean, we have this experience in Poland. We always got a fair share, but when the government changed in 2015, it vanished from one day to the other, and we were able to rebuild it with several initiatives, and it makes me actually very proud to say that we are more independent than ever, because there is nobody who has a lever on you, even if they want to.
Okay, thank you. So I think we are now at the end, and Mark and I hope next time we meet in person.